Dust hung in the air like a heavy curtain, shimmering in the late afternoon light. The canyon was a living echo of steel and stone, where engines growled and treads chewed through the earth. Somewhere above that thunder, the orders had already been shouted. Orders she was never meant to follow. She was just the backup gunner, the one assigned to carry the extra weight when the real shooters got tired. Invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. At least, that's what they thought. A cluster of armored vehicles pushed forward in a tight line, the air behind them rippling with heat. A war correspondent somewhere would later write about the moment. The arrogant advance, the dust cloud rising like a banner of conquest, and the lone figure who broke the rhythm. But right now, in this instant, all eyes ignored her. She was nothing to the commanders scanning the horizon through binoculars. Nothing to the soldiers barking over radios, a shadow in the background, waiting to be told where to stand and when to move. Only one man noticed her, noticed and scoffed. He leaned from the hatch of the lead vehicle, his smirk cutting through the distance. His words, though swallowed by the roar of engines, carried a meaning sharper than any insult. "You're not needed. You wouldn't dare." She adjusted the strap of the launcher resting on her shoulder, her fingers tightening around the grip. The metal was hot under her palms, warmed by hours in the sun. Her lips pressed together, not in defiance, but in discipline. They didn't know that silence could be sharper than any shouted challenge. Her backstory was stitched together from battles no one had cared to remember. She had been 19 when she signed the papers, her signature trembling under the recruiter's approving gaze. It was less about service and more about survival back then. Her hometown shrinking by the year, jobs vanishing, her father gone and her mother fading into the walls of a too-small kitchen. She left with a duffel bag, and the belief that proving herself would mean something. The proving ground came faster than she imagined. Her first deployment was a blur of sandstorms and sudden firefights, of comrades whose names were whispered in grief before she could learn their favorite joke. She carried them with her, faces, scents, half-finished stories, each one a weight heavier than any weapon. One in particular still walked beside her in memory. A tall, sharp-eyed friend who once taught her how to judge distance by the rhythm of her heartbeat. He had died with that rhythm pounding in her ears, an unseen sniper ending the lesson before it could be finished. After that, she became the quiet one. Orders in, execution out. She never argued, never pushed for recognition, never sought the spotlight. She was in every briefing but seldom spoke, in every convoy but never in the lead. Others assumed it was because she lacked the nerve. The truth was simpler. She had learned that silence is a kind of shield, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you overlook. Now, in this canyon, the dismissal was almost routine. She felt it in the way the commanders failed to glance her way, in the muttered joke from a nearby private about tourists with rockets. But she didn't flinch. She watched, she waited. The enemy had been clever, hidden in the fractured rock high above the convoy's path. Most of the column hadn't spotted them yet, but she had. A shimmer of movement, the wrong kind of shadow against the cliff face, and she knew ambush. Her heartbeat slowed. She measured the distance without looking at the scope. 180 meters to the first gun nest. The canyon walls would trap the blast, magnifying it. The column would be boxed in within seconds. A commander shouted an order for the tanks to push forward. She stayed still. Another soldier, the designated gunner, was struggling to align his shot. Too narrow a window, too slow. Her muscles remembered her friend's lesson: distance, rhythm, timing. She felt the shape of the canyon in her bones, the echo before the strike. She stepped forward without asking. A few heads turned more in curiosity than alarm. The smirking officer in the hatch barked something she didn't register. She didn't need to. The launcher was already balanced, her stance locked. She saw the missile's path in her mind before she pulled the trigger. 6 seconds. That's how long it took from the flash of ignition to the roar of impact. The missile tore through the air, a blazing line against the dusty sky, and found its mark with surgical precision. The rock face erupted, sending shards and fire down into the hidden nest. The enemy's fire died before it was born. The convoy halted in a stunned wave, engines idling as if the machines themselves were trying to process what had happened. She lowered the launcher slowly, the smell of scorched propellant curling into the air. No words, no celebration. Just the sound of crumbling stones settling into silence. One soldier muttered under his breath, something that might have been respect or disbelief. Another took a step back, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. The officer in the hatch was no longer smirking. His mouth moved, forming words he didn't seem sure he should say. It wasn't until a younger private spoke, voice low, almost reverent, that the truth cut through the canyon. They all heard him, even those still gripping their rifles tight. She'd just saved them, all of them. Her own thoughts stayed quiet. She remembered her friend's rhythm, the steady beat that could outlast panic. She thought of her hometown, of the kitchen walls her mother stared at alone, of the long road that had led her here. Not for medals, not for rank. Just for the people who would go home tonight because of her. Later, the story would spread. How the quiet backup gunner had ended the battle in 6 seconds flat. How she'd never raised her voice, never asked for thanks, and walked away with the same calm she had when it began. Someone would recall her words, the only ones she offered when pressed. You don't need to be loud to be heard. And in that canyon, the silence she left behind spoke louder than any victory cheer. Soldiers watched her go, a few straightening unconsciously, as if standing in the presence of something they couldn't name. The officer finally removed his helmet, holding it against his chest, though she never turned to see. War has a way of swallowing names, but sometimes it leaves behind an image, a figure framed by dust and light, moving away from the ruins without looking back. She became that image, not a myth, not a legend, but a reminder. The overlooked can become the decisive. Somewhere, far from the canyon, a mother would sleep easier without knowing why. And that, she thought as the horizon opened before her, was reason enough. If you have ever known someone whose strength was their silence, whose courage lived in the shadows while others took the light, then you know the truth of her story. These are the battles the world rarely sees, the victories that leave no parade, only lives spared and a quiet dignity that outlasts the noise. This is the story of the quiet backup gunner who changed the course of a battle without asking for anything in return. Where are you watching from? Who in your life deserves to be honored for the battles they've fought in silence? Share your story, and remember, sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never shouts.